Welcome to the Institute for Critical Study of Society's Sunday morning Marxist Forum. My name is Raj Sahai, who along with Jean Rule and 7 other members of the program committee have organized today's session. The Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Niebel Proctor Marxist Library was formed in 2004 to preserve Marx's heritage, as well as supporting emerging struggles for racial and gender equality and for socialism. ICSS, which is short for Institute for Critical Studies Society, is a separate organization now. The opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, and publications are those of the authors only and do not represent a group consensus on the issues discussed. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx, who in his 11th thesis on Feuerbach said the philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And here Marx was not saying just do it, okay? Rather, it was a call to conscious action. Our guest speaker today is Professor John Bellamy Foster, who teaches sociology at the University of Oregon and is editor of Monthly Review, which is a long-established socialist magazine in the United States. I believe it is from 1953, if I'm not mistaken. He writes about political economy of capitalism and economic crisis, ecology and ecological crisis, and Marxist theory. Among his published works, The Vulnerable Planet, he has numerous, so I'm going to be giving you a short list. A Short Economic History of Environment, that's one. Marx's Ecology, Materialism and Nature. His reinterpretation of Marx on ecology introduced the concept of metabolic rift and was widely influential. One of who was influenced was me. Another is Ecology Against Capitalism, which focused on the critique of capitalist economics from the standpoint of the environment. His 2006 book, Naked Imperialism, along with frequent editorials in the pages of Monthly Review, attempted to account for the growing U.S. military role in the world and the shift toward a more visible, aggressive, and global projection, as you have seen in the recent weeks and months, actually, and years. Critique of Intelligent Design, Foster's book, co-authored with Brett Clark and Richard York, is a continuation of his research on materialist philosophy and the relationship between ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus and Karl Marx. And he's writing another book on that, and hopefully he'll tell us about it during his lecture. Also in his 2020 book, The Return of Nature, Socialism and Dialectical, Socialism and Ecology. John showed how socialist analysis and materialist scientists sought to develop a dialectical naturalism rooted in the critique of capitalism. The topic of his talk today is very timely, published in Monthly Review in 3 issues. The title is The Trump Doctrine and the New M.A.G.A. Imperialism, MAGA imperialism. He will speak for about 40 minutes or so, and then following a brief intermission, he will answer questions and respond to comments. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, a conscious activist, writer, a prolific writer, John Bellamy Foster. Thank you. John, it's yours.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction, and I'm very pleased to be here speaking to an organization that I've heard of in one way or another for many years. And as Raj says, I wrote 3 articles on the second coming of Trump in the April, May, and June issues of Month Review. And I'm mainly going to talk today about the article in the June issue, the Trump Doctrine and the new MAGA Imperialism, simply for limits of time, but also the international aspect of the Trump regime has been perhaps the most confusing of all in terms of the general analysis, and even on the left. There's been incredible confusion about whether Trump is an isolationist and an anti-imperialist, or whether the Trump regime represents carrying forth of imperialism. I imagine in this group there's less confusion on this than in others. But even with the first Trump regime, or the first Trump administration, and what it demonstrated, still the confusion remains. And the confusion is partly disseminated by the media. In my first book on this, Trump in the White House in 2017, I explained the basic approach to the world towards imperialism of Trump, and how it's related to the growth of neofascism. But even on the left, this was not taken in, and even with all of Trump's warlike actions in that period, still illusions prevailed. So you have thinkers like Christian Parenti, who an erstwhile leftist in the United States, well known, writing for the Compact magazine, which is a MAGA-dominated, MAGA hegemonic publication, which he writes for now. And he argued that Trump was anti-empire, anti-imperialist, anti-national security state, anti-Pentagon, and so on. And the quotations are all in this article. And others like Walden Bellow, in a piece that was recently published on Foreign Policy in Focus, which is a left outlet, have argued that Trump is an isolationist, and he represents the United States pulling away from the world. And various conceptions like that have been coming out of Europe, where I think they've misperceived the whole phenomenon. So part of this article was aimed at stripping away those illusions while trying to explain exactly what kind of imperialism the new Trump regime represented. And it's clear that Trump's MAGA regime is opposed to liberal internationalism, our U.S. hegemony through a kind of liberal internationalist globalization that has prevailed since the Second World War. He's trying to change the rules of the game, and that his whole regime is trying to change the regime of the game. This is not simply something that's a product of Trump's mind or some sort of aberration, but has to do with the fact that the United States is weakening rapidly in the world. It's losing its hegemony. So what they're instituting is a recovery plan for U.S. imperialism, and trying to resurrect a U.S. imperialism. And the strategy that was that was presented in the first Trump administration was basically what we call a reverse Kissinger strategy. Not that Kissinger was opposed to it. In fact, Kissinger people were very high up initially, at least in the first Trump administration, and the idea was just as Kissinger had broken China off from Russia, had opened up relations with China in order to disconnect it from the Soviet Union. And that was the strategy. The new strategy was to make a détente with Russia, and moving away from the Democratic Party strategy, which had been very much in terms of the enlargement of NATO and the eventual breakup of Russia, and to instead make a détente with the Russians, so the United States could direct all of its economic and military firepower at China, which is now understood to be the singular enemy, the singular threat to the United States in new strategy. And so all of this, this was sort of the bedrock in the first Trump administration. It meant not only détente with Russia, but also freeing the United States from struggles in the Middle East and Central Asia to a large extent in order to be able to pivot to China. The pivot to China had been initiated by Obama in 2010, 2011, but for reasons I'll explain, he couldn't carry it out fully. And so you have, in the Trump administration shifting everything to a new Cold War against China. That's the key. And so what looks like to some people like isolationism is really a kind of a restructuring of imperialism. So I want to explain this. And one of the things is, in the Trump administration, they were very, very frustrated that Trump had this new doctrine. All administrations are supposed to have a kind of a military, a geostrategic doctrine, and he had a very complex doctrine in terms of shift in foreign policy, but nobody picked up on it. Michael Anton, who was in the National Security Council, he's one of the great big MAGA theorists. I talk about him extensively in the May article that I wrote. He was on the National Security Council and the deputy counsel to Trump for strategic communications. And he basically had him leave the White House and re-enter during the first Trump administration and re-enter civilian realm and get him a position as a professor at Hillside College, which is a MAGA institution, and Hilldale College, I'm sorry, and then he gave a talk at Princeton, which was published in Foreign Policy, where he laid out the entire Trump Doctrine, although the media generally ignored this. But it's extremely important in understanding what was happening. Since the media didn't pick up on Trump's approach, they had somebody from the Trump administration actually deliver this extensive talk on the Trump doctrine, and still the media largely ignored it. But Trump was thrilled. Anton has been very important to his whole approach, so he's now deputy secretary of state for policy, which is equivalent to an assistant secretary of state, the person who comes up with the ideas and the geopolitical strategy. So he now occupies that position in the present Trump administration. And Anton explained that the Trump administration was opposed to empire in one sense, that empires are traditionally multi-ethnic. Well, the Trump Doctrine and the Trump administration believed was opposed to multi-ethnic empires. It believed that nations should be organized around a single ethnicity. This is very important. The other way, and it also rejected liberal internationalism, the basic structures that had been put in place after the Second World War by the United States and the whole liberal political economy and internationalism, because it was no longer working for the United States. It's now necessary for the United States to go on its own and use its muscles. And so in the Trump Doctrine, Anton explained that there were four pillars to the Trump Doctrine. The first one was national populism. You have to think about that. You have to remember that the Nazis were called National Socialists. The preferred term in MAGA for their own movement is national populist. And, that was, I think, really promoted by Steve Bannon, but is heavily used. And it's very important, and they're very aware, because this is a neo-fascist movement, they're very aware of the connection. The second pillar is the rejection of liberal internationalism, which I've already talked about. The third pillar of the Trump Doctrine was consistent nationalism for all countries. I mean, this is basically the realist approach. And Anton is a student of Machiavelli and Hobbes. Not the good Machiavellian Hobbes, the bad Machiavellian Hobbes, as interpreted by the right as mere means to power. And the fourth pillar is the most important. It argued for a return to normalcy of a racial ethnic definition of national identity as a principle for the new hyper-nationalist America First and hyper-nationalist America First imperium. So return to the normalcy of a racial ethnic definition of identity, and the racial ethnic definition of U.S. identity, which meant, of course, it wasn't said, it meant white nationalism. Okay, and this, Anton went back to Aristotle. Aristotle said there were three political elements. The first was the tribe, or we'd say ethnicity. And the second was the polis, or the city-state. And the third was empire. The argument was that the United States had to be reoriented towards the tribe or ethnicity, racial ethnicity, and have a nationalism, a national identity, and in a sense, an empire based on that, a hyper-nationalist empire, that's also a racial ethnic empire, not a multi-ethnic empire. So this is how the Trump Doctrine was laid out. I think that if people understood this, there would be a lot more clarity about the discussion of Trump, of what is happening now. So this plays out mainly in the form of, there were three areas that I dealt with. One was economic imperialism, and the second was the class and white nationalist aspect of all of this. And the third part was the war on China, the new Cold War on China, but a new Cold War in which a hot war is envisaged. So the economic imperialism really comes into play when you see Trump's tariffs, which you all know about, and you know how he put 10% tariffs on the whole world, and then 60 countries had much higher tariffs of varying amounts. Europe had a 30% tariff initially placed on it, and China, I think a 34% tariff initially, but then when China reacted, they raised it up to 145%. And then there's been kind of back pauses and backing off and so on. But the general character of it is clear. And at the center of this is an attempt to restore U.S. hegemony. I mean, it's often presented as though it's an attempt to reindustrialize the United States, and you can see that if that part of it, the economic nationalist part, is quite evident if you look at some of the Trump think tanks or the MAGA think tanks, particularly American Compass is the most important think tank in this respect, and funded by Thomas Klingenstein, the Wall Street investment banker, who also is the biggest funder and the head of the main MAGA think tank, the Claremont Institute. So, and American Compass, of course, is very anti-China, to say the least. Details are in my article, but they believe that the key to they have a very sensible, in some ways, realistic view of what's happened to the economy, but their answer is tariffs and economic nationalism, and so they're very tied into all of this. And you have Peter Navarro, who is the tariff guy and the trade guy in the Trump administration, as he was in the first one, and he believes, he's written book after book on the coming wars on China and how tariffs are the key to the economic war against China. He also believes in a military war against China, and that he says the tariffs are going to deliver trillions of dollars. He claimed, I think, $3 trillion in additional annual revenue, which was then built into the budget so that they could give more taxes back to the rich. But it's not all going to materialize the way it was said. But the key person is Stephen Moran, who was a senior counsel to the Treasury in the first Trump administration, and then in the present Trump administration is made head of the Council of Economic Advisors. So he's the chief economist in the Trump administration. And Moran came up with, and I mean, he's connected to Hudson Bay Capital and directly to Trump's finances that way. But Moran came up with the notion of a Mar-a-Lago Accord. And this is the tariffs have to be understood in this context. So you might remember that some of you might remember that back in 1985, the Reagan administration introduced the Plaza Accord at the Plaza Hotel, and named after the Plaza Hotel in New York. And the United States was more powerful then. And Japan's economy was growing. It was like it was considered the most successful economy. It was going to catch up with the United States, and so on and so on. You might remember that. It was a problem for the United States. So they had this meeting at the Plaza Accord in New York. I mean, the Plaza Hotel in New York, and with Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and so on, all of the big economic powers at the time, and the United States forced an agreement where the U.S. currency would be depreciated in relation to all the rest of the currencies, and that the other countries would go along with that. They'd sell dollars. They'd allow the U.S. Currency to depreciate in a controlled manner, and that was all effected. And shortly after Japan had its financial crisis, the biggest, this huge financial crisis. I mean, real estate in Tokyo had been off the roof, and everything came down, and it was because of the depreciation of the dollar relative to the Japanese yen, and the Japanese economy entered economic stagnation, basically no growth, and has been in that position virtually ever since. And its economic influence and power has diminished, and but that was a product of the Plaza Accord. So Trump knew about that, if only because he was so thrilled at the time in 1985 that he bought the Plaza Hotel to celebrate the accord, and then he as he always did, he drove it into bankruptcy. And the idea is a Mar-a-Lago Accord that would repeat this. That would, the idea is the U.S. has this enormous trade deficit. The idea is to balance balance U.S. trade and increase U.S. exports and cut back on imports. But tariffs are a crude way of dealing with that, and have all sorts of problems. But they're a weapon. The idea was to use the tariffs as a weapon to force Europe, China, Vietnam, and other countries that have a lot of dollars, Japan, to allow their currencies to appreciate against the dollar, therefore improving the U.S. situation in trade massively at their expense. Now, the EU is not really that. In terms of Europe, the main leverage the United States has, and in Japan, is it also has the military bases, and it pays for a lot of NATO costs. So the United States is saying, look, you're going to have to pay tribute to us. You're going to have to pay for NATO and for all of these military bases. And of course, if you allow your currencies to appreciate, we'll back off from that, right? So that the actual military spending is being used as leverage in this. But also, they can't use that against China, and they can't use it very, as effectively against the EU as maybe as they could before. At any rate, in terms of China, which has $3 trillion in dollars in its reserves, they can't force it to go along by those means, because of course we don't provide any military aid to China. And in fact, they can't force China at all. So he tried to have these like 145% tariffs on China, but China came back with it. And when they tried to put specific trade blocks on China, China came back with restricting the export of rare earths and so on, which they have a virtual monopoly on. And the United States, and the media isn't presenting it that way, but the United States has had to succumb. It's these new deals are basically the United States backing off because Trump still wants to attack China, but he doesn't want to bring down the U.S. economy in the process for his own sake. So there's all of this going on behind the tariffs it's really important. The tariffs haven't been as inflationary as we thought because the dollar depreciated rather than, the dollar appreciated rather than depreciating. So that nullified some of the inflationary effects. But we think that by mid-July, only about there'll be big shortages and there'll be inflationary effects because only 1/3 of the ships left for China with cargo. No, 1/3 less ships left from China with cargo, and this is going to come into effect probably in mid-July. So we'll see supply side shortages. So then turning to you all understand about the white nationalism, I think, and that MAGA is actually a neo-fascist movement. There's all arguments about whether Trump is a neo-fascist. It isn't really about him in a way. He is at the head of a neo-fascist movement, which you have to understand, not ideologically like liberal analysts try to look at fascism or movements in the fascist genus. You have to look at it in class terms. And the lower middle class, what we call the lower middle class, has a kind of contradictory class relation. You could see it as part of the working class. You could see it as closer to the upper middle class. But actually, sociologically in the United States, it's divided itself off from both the working class and the upper middle class. And everything to understand this, I guess, and to understand the new Cold War, too, you have to go back to 2008. In 2008, I'm trying to see where I am with time here.
Oh, you have
What?
you have 10 more minutes.
Okay. Well, in
Or
2008,
15, that'd be okay. Yeah.
2008, there was the great financial crisis. And a number of things happened here. I won't look, but one thing that happened domestically, I'll mention the international aspect afterwards. Domestically, the Tea Party emerged almost right away, and originally over not wanting to bail out corporations. There was a confusion, but it rose out of the lower middle class and mobilized very quickly after some initial media blasts, and then the Tea Party arose across the United States, and major interests, conservative, powerful interests within the capitalist class, in finance, in technology, elements of monopoly finance capital realized that it's possible to mobilize the lower middle class with a revanchist ideology, and basically left to its own, the lower middle class had a very hyper-nationalistic, revanchist racist ideology. We're talking about populations that are mostly white, small property owners, small businesses, small rural landowners, people who manage, some of the corporate, various corporate subsidiaries, privilege elements of the working class, and so on. The lower middle, lower middle class in this sense, and a lot of rural population, they had this kind of natural ideology where they basically their incomes were well above the median of the working class, well above of most of the working class, and the population is predominantly white, and they basically attacked both the upper middle class, which they actually thought, or professional managerial class, which they were convinced was the ruling class in the United States, ruling the government and everything else, and they're very critical of the working class. They had fear of falling into the working class, which is seen as a very diverse population, and seen in racial terms and in terms of poverty. So the lower middle class, and tied into the whole history of the South, the lower middle class ends up being this very reactionary part of the society, which is always dangerous to mobilize. All fascist movements are based on this sector of society primarily, but mobilizing them is very dangerous even for the capitalist class, because in some aspects they're critical of capitalism, although they normally ally themselves with the very rich, with the top corporations, but their interests are somewhat opposed. So mobilizing them, capital mobilizing them, is only done in extreme situations. But it was decided, it was understood with the Tea Party as the basis, as the initial basis, that that part of the population could be mobilized and made into a political force. And Trump was to inherit all of that. And that population, that MAGA population, though, is primarily nationalist rather than internationalist, which puts a different kind of context on the American imperium. So you have Trump, celebrating in this MAGA ideology, and consistent with it, the greatest American president is James Polk, who led in the Mexican-American War and took over 500,000 square miles of territory from Mexico, annexed Texas, and annexed the Oregon territory. And so that's Trump talks about taking over Greenland and Panama and so on. This is all part of this nationalist ethic, as well as the things like bringing in white South Africans as refugees from South Africa, as though they're an oppressed population. Very explicitly racist policies, and above all, the attack on immigrants, on millions of undocumented immigrants, but immigrants in general, as long as their skin color is not white, and various ways of doing that. And so, and all of this, because it's a neo-fascist movement, people like Anton theorized that once Trump was elected, he could be Caesar. This was literally, and he could do all of these things. He could cross all the legal boundaries. He could be the law and make the courts bend to him. So all of that is part of this. Now, but then there's the war on China. War on China meant détente with Russia, which hasn't been entirely successful, and it meant quieting things down in the Middle East, except for, of course, because there's Christian nationalism is central to the movement. They're completely in accord with absolute genocide in in Palestine, the extermination of the entire population and the occupation of the entire landmass. But they wanted to quiet down things in the Middle East and with respect to Iran as well, and to direct the efforts to China. Elbridge Colby was the great strategic theorist in the first Trump administration, and he was the one who wrote the 2018 National Security Strategy, and now he's Undersecretary of State for Policy. He is the one who introduced limited nuclear war for the first time in the 2018 nuclear strategy. In the 2018 defense strategy, I'm sorry, he entered limited nuclear war into the general military strategy of the United States up front, and in that they designated China as the primary enemy. And he got nominated. He almost didn't get approved by Congress because the neoconservatives didn't like him because he didn't want to go after Iran. He wanted to back off from Iran and focus everything on China. Because they say 2027 is the year for confrontation with China. They say it over and over again. It started with the first Trump administration. So they focused everything on China, and he almost didn't get approved, but Hegseth and Anton and Thiel and all of the big guns came to play to get Colby in there. He's the grandson of William Colby, the former CIA director, and Elbridge Colby is a blue blood, but he's the architect of what is called strategy of denial, which is a counterforce strategy. You may think that the United States nuclear strategy is based on MAD, mutual assured destruction, but it hasn't been for decades. It's based on counterforce. Counterforce is the simplest definition of counterforce is it's about making nuclear weapons usable. So counterforce is the basis of U.S. first strike nuclear strike policy, but it's also the basis of U.S. limited nuclear war. And Elbridge Colby has come out plans for war with China over Taiwan, including limited nuclear war. The conflict with China over Taiwan has to involve the U.S. attacking the Chinese mainland, their factories, their infrastructure, and eventually, their command posts, and of course, nuclear facilities. And there's this whole escalation ladder that's planned out. The idea is that the United States can command each step in the ladder of escalation so that China won't dare to escalate up, and we can win. We can have a limited nuclear war even, and it can stop there. If China gains control over Taiwan, then the plan includes attacking both China and Taiwan. All of this is strategized by the person who is the key figure in Trump military policy. Behind, besides the 2027, there's the Golden Dome, the support nuclear defense system, which won't work, but could create all sorts, increase the danger of nuclear war. And Trump said Hitler once had a poster, support Adolf Hitler for equality and peace. Equality meant a military equality. Peace meant peace through strength. Anyway, Trump talks about supporting peace, but it's always peace by strength. That is the peace of the grave. And so we're in a very dangerous position here. I wanted to, I'm out of time, but I wanted to read a little quote from Paul Sweezy, if I can. This from this, we just discovered yesterday a piece from Paul Sweezy from 1964 that was never published. And I just want to read the very beginning of it to you because you'll see why. It's called Freedom in Economics. He said, assume a ship under the command of a mad captain headed for a certain shipwreck. What would freedom mean to the people on board? To arrange relations among themselves in such a way as to minimize the amount of coercion exercised by some over others? Or is it to overpower the captain, gain control of the ship, and head for shore? There can hardly be any doubt about this answer. In this particular situation, the essence of freedom for the people on the ship is the ability to control their collective fate. I believe that we in the United States and in all the developed capitalist countries, but I will speak only of the United States, are in the position of those people. I believe that the American ship of state is headed straight for disaster, and that the only really meaningful sense in which we who are on board can speak of freedom is in terms of a struggle to get control of it and to steer it onto a safe and rational course. I'll stop there.
Thank you, John. Thank you for very exciting talk. Not on a very serious subject, exciting only in the sense of us gaining the landscape of horror that awaits us. So thank you. Now we're going to go to some announcements. Next Sunday, for next Sunday's program, we're going to decide tomorrow in our meeting. So please go to our website, which is ICSSmarx.org. There also you can make contributions. A method of contribution include sending a check or through PayPal or buy me a coffee or Patreon. But we're seeking funds because it costs some money to put up this relatively inexpensive program. So please do that. A week after next Sunday, we'll have Dan Kowalik speaking on attack on Iran. He wrote a book, I think, a couple of years back, Plan to Attack Iran, and now it has happened, or at least it's short war. So attack definitely has happened. So go there. And the rest, oh, by the way, some rules about upcoming discussions. Please raise your hands, and I've already seen 4 hands are raised. Everybody will get 2 minutes. We'll be given a warning as you approach 2 minutes. Then you finish your sentence and stop. John will not, if he chooses to respond to you, whether question or comment, he has no limit to do that. But we're finishing the program at 12, 40 minutes from now. So please be very disciplined in your, don't make just general remarks about something that interests you at the moment, but keep to the topic. So with that urging to you, I will go to the first person who raised his hand, at least in my view of it, is Richard Wright. And I'll try to get to everybody. Richard Wright, please go ahead. Followed by him would be Mehmet Bayram.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Foster. Yeah, I wanted to sort of take it off topic a little bit, if you don't mind. And that is, just before this program, I was in a webinar by the International Manifest Group, headed, convened, if you will, by Radhika Desai. And my question is, and like I said, this is off topic. I hope that'll be okay. when I saw you in the Radical Philosophy Association's meeting about 8 or 9 months ago, you gave your presentation with masks because you were recovering from COVID, and we scheduled you to present here, and then it was delayed again because of the COVID. And I'm just kind of wondering if during all this, have you had an opportunity or to read Radical Desai's book on COVID and capitalism? And, if you have maybe given any thought about how to, personal reflections on any of it and her topics. Thank you very much.
I've read quite a number of books on COVID and capitalism, and I actually wrote some articles on COVID, and but I didn't catch the name of the author. I'm not sure. I don't think
Radhika Desai. Radhika Desai. Radhika
No,
Desai.
I haven't read that one, and on these issues there is a long tradition in Marxism on epidemiology, and so I'm basically I basically adhere to that. Rob Wallace is a major figure. He wrote this book, Dead Epidemiologists. He's a fantastic epidemiologist, but we've traced the Marxist epidemiology from the time of Marx and Engels up to the present, and COVID represents certain special features, but the idea was that disease had been, and Richard Levins in 2000 in an article in Monthly Review called Is Capitalism a Disease? Raised the question of whether capitalism was actually bringing back disease, and whether capitalism itself was a disease. For a long time, there was an argument that disease had been eliminated, at least epidemics, major pandemics. But Levins argued that wasn't true, and globalization under capitalism was bringing it back. And there's a lot of work within this general tradition. Of course, there's things on COVID from different angles. My experience with COVID, it wasn't so much that I was recovering from COVID then, but I almost died of COVID. My respiration went down, my blood oxygen went down to 79, and I almost died, and I was in the hospital for a week. So I have to, because of vulnerabilities I have to take precautions, but that's just a personal life it's a personal life condition, a condition that a lot of people share, and but the bigger problem is more significant. One thing is, why did the United States have so many people who died per capita, as opposed to other countries? In China, it was almost minuscule. And we criticized them. How dare they take those measures that kept their population from dying? But this raises all sorts of complex issues. I don't know if we spend too much time on this, I think we wouldn't be able to deal with the other questions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, John. So we'll go next to Mehmet Behram. Mehmet, please go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for a great presentation. And I want to touch on your neo-fascism analysis. I agree with you that we do have at least a transition to fascism, but it looks like in the left there is a huge confusion about fascism, and people are expecting fascism to come, step by step as Hitler or Mussolini did, and when we don't see those first steps that mimic exactly how the Nazis or the fascists came in Italy, then people seem to take it like, oh, we don't have fascism. It will never happen here. So if you don't mind, maybe just try to open up this neo-fascism, how we are going to see fascism in this country and in other parts. I'm expecting this to come to, Europe and other places as well, because of the crisis of capitalism that's happening, and fascism seems to be the only remedy that they have to keep people in control. So I really appreciate your take on it, and if you can open up that neo-fascism, what we are going to see different than the classical fascism. Again, thank you very much for a great presentation.
Actually, we have to start with the classical fascism. I mean, most of you are historical materialists, so you understand that history doesn't simply repeat itself, that it develops in different ways, but we need the historical analysis. And the classical theory of fascism came from Marxism. I mean, it was, and you can take all of the major Marxist theorists on fascism, and particularly in the 30s and shortly after, and it was understood as a class phenomenon, and based in the petty bourgeoisie or the lower middle class. So that's very, very crucial. The Marxist theory of fascism, classical class conception of fascism, dominated the entire understanding, so much that Behemoth by Franz Neumann was used in the Nuremberg trials. It was using one of the classic Marxist texts in the Nuremberg trials. And it was only later that the class and materialist aspects of fascism and also the understanding in relation to questions of hegemony, international hegemony, all of that was removed, and liberal theorists came along and redefined it as simply, and the Frankfurt School actually played a role in this, as actually a psychological state or an ideological phenomenon divorced from all material conditions. So in that sense, we have to go back to the classical Marxist approach and we have to understand the class bases of neo-fascism, of movements in the fascist genus, because they're not all, it doesn't replicate exactly the same everywhere. Like any political phenomenon, general political phenomenon, even if you talk about liberalism, there's going to be a lot of different forms, right? And manifesting in different conditions. But there are certain continuities that we look for. And one is the class aspect. And the class aspect is not just the petty bourgeoisie, but it's actually an alliance between the petty bourgeoisie and monopoly capital. Classically, that's how it was understood. And that alliance actually means monopoly capital mobilizing a large extent, mobilizing the lower middle class or the petty bourgeoisie and utilizing them as a hammer because they needed a mass political force. So that's, kind of a character of the fascist genus. Another aspect is that all fascist systems, when they come to power, whether they're elected or not, they try to work out of the existing constitution. Hitler didn't overthrow the Weimar Constitution directly. He actually said, he's going to work within the Weimar Constitution. He declared it would be wrong to do otherwise. I mean, strategically wrong. What they did was they introduced all sorts of emergency clauses and exceptions that gave power to the Führer principle, right? And they introduced the Führer principle, and they utilized Gleichschaltung, which we can see operating in the US today in a somewhat different way, but not all that different, where you basically have to get the state to fall in the whole state. That is the legislature, the judiciary branch, the military, the police, the national security, and so on, the civil service, and then go in and at the federal, state, and local levels, and they all have to fall into line. And then you have to move to civil society, and you have to get that all to fall in line. The media, the educational institutions, and so on. This is how Gleichschaltung works. It's been theorized, and we're seeing it work that way now. And a lot of the people who are in the Trumpian administration actually know this, right? Some of the theorists behind it, MAGA theorists, they know how it works. So you have to move through these institutions and get them to you don't have to beat them down. You have to get them to comply, to back down, because they're liberal institutions. They're not anti-capitalist anyway. You have to get them to comply. The fascism is not something that's opposed. The antonym of fascism is not socialism. It's liberal democracy. What fascism is another regime of class control within capitalism in periods where it's in an emergency state, and that the capitalist class, or a large part of it, decides it has to move in that direction. So this is all a phenomenon that we can understand in Marxist terms. So you try to understand in liberal terms, in terms of ideology or racism. I mean, the ideology is there, the racism is there, but that is not the fundamental, doesn't give you the fundamental structure of movements in the fascist genus. I hope that helps you understand a bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Judith Osterman will be next. Judith, please unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay. Yeah, there she is. Okay,
Got it. Okay, all right. Oh, thank you very much for a great presentation. I was wondering about the use of the word détente for the situation with Russia, because it seems to me that that Trump, or the Trump administration, has really passed the torch on the European allies and asked them to take over some of the funding. They actually still are funding the Ukraine militarily, and I think that I think that they don't intend to abandon their plans to take Russia apart and exploit it. I think that they want to reserve that until after they deal with China, if they are indeed able to. Also, I read that the two moves, one is an E27 that you mentioned, and the other one was this year. So I was wondering what you thought of the probability of it coming sooner. Also, I'd like to ask you a personal question, which is, did you have the vax? And that's all. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for keeping brief. Okay, John, go ahead.
Well, in terms of détente with Russia, I mean, that was Trump's policy in 2017, and it ended up, and it continued into this administration. The strategy was, that, I mean, and Anton, I think it was Anton within and it's in my article, they said, look, the Russians are white like us. They're part of our, I didn't say exactly those terms. They say they're part of our same ethnic historical heritage. The whole idea was, and that's very deep in MAGA, but the whole idea was détente with Russia, not fight the two big Eurasian powers together, but fight them separately. I think that I did skip over one thing that maybe would help. I told you I was going to mention that 2008 that there was an international effect too. When the great financial crisis occurred in 2008, all of the advanced capitalist countries, I mean, most of the world went into a deep economic crisis. I mean, so much so the financial crisis threatened a complete meltdown that enormously frightened the ruling class, which is one of the reasons why they decided they needed to move in and control the system more directly. So that fed into Neofascism. But the other thing was that the Chinese economy went down momentarily, only momentarily, and then rocketed back up to like a 10% rate of growth. Well, all the 7 to 10% rate of growth, the entire Western world was experiencing negative growth. And China has eluded the business cycle to large extent. I mean, the major economic crises, but here was testimony. China kept on going. Well, and at that point, it was at that point they realized that China was an enormous danger, that there was no real stopping it economically. It was then at 2010 to 2011 that Obama and Hillary Clinton introduced the pivot to China, and they were going to try and move against China, but they were moving slowly. The reason was China was having a leadership change, and they were uncertain. They introduced the pivot, but they thought when Xi was coming in, they thought they had their Gorbachev. I won't go into all the reasons, but they thought Xi was their Gorbachev, which they've been waiting for. And they thought that for a few years. And it was only in 2015 they realized that Xi wasn't Gorbachev, that Xi was represented a reinvigoration of socialism with Chinese characteristics. And then they went in panic. Trump came into 2016 and basically declared the new Cold War on China, because the only way to stop China was by those means. And that's what this is all about. And the Democrats came back in and they restarted. They kept the new Cold War on China, but they restarted their attack on Russia, attacking both Eurasian powers at the same time, thinking that they could maybe win with Russia. But that is a very dangerous strategy. And Trump came back in, and his group wanted détente with Russia, slow it down so they could focus on China. And although they haven't been successful in stopping the Ukraine war, they're being less, they're less focused on that. And so this is the situation. So yeah, they as in terms of like the European allies, they want them to pay tribute to the U.S. as part of U.S. nationalism, but that's also a lever to get these countries to agree to a Mar-a-Lago Accord to appreciate their currencies. If they do, then the United States will will not force them to cover the military expenditures as much. And so there's a lot of things that are going on here. The United States probably doesn't mind if Europe it continues the war in Ukraine, as long as the U.S. is able to put most of its weight into combating China.
Okay, thank you. So the next person is Hobby Hukill. Please go ahead, Hobby.
Hello, Dr. Foster. I'm pleased to hear you in person for the first time. And thank you for your really enlightening mapping of the intellectual superstructure of MAGA. It's nice to know that there's some hard intellectual bones underneath the chaos. And you've done a good job of elucidating that. I thank you for that. You've mentioned, well, you've described rather nicely the MAGA side of its conflict with China, its overall interest in zeroing in on China. But I'd like you to focus more on the internal contradictions, or shall we say, just the contradictions facing U.S. empire. Aside from the objectives of the MAGA movement, what realistically are their prospects? It seems to me that U.S. imperialism doesn't have a hell of a lot longer to last, and it's facing its own utterly intractable contradictions. Could you elaborate on that some? Am I missing something here? Or what's your assessment overall of their probability of success? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a big question, is how you judge success. Let me deal with one contradiction, say Iran. The Trump administration did not want to get embroiled with Iran because they're steering towards China. And they're in this latest episode, there was a conflict between Colby, representing the China side, and the neoconservatives, who always want war with China, and there's a sense that the neoconservatives were winning. But what Trump did was a one-off with Iran, right? He let the Iranians know in advance that they were going to attack and where they were going to attack, so they could remove the enriched uranium. Then they flew in planes and bombed. I think they used the bunker buster bombs on Fordro, but there's some question about that. I think they did. It's just not, they can't destroy. They weren't able to destroy it because bunker buster bombs aren't enough. You would need tactical nuclear weapons. So then they fired missiles from submarines at the other nuclear sites. They made sure they didn't attack from U.S. bases, so Iran wouldn't have an excuse to reply with U.S. bases. And they basically told Iran where they could retaliate, and it would be okay. So a lot of it was theater, because Trump had to look like he did something decisive. But I mean, it's damaging because in the process he basically tore up the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, which means that Iran now will seek a nuclear bomb. But at any rate, the idea was a one-off, settle that, and they're focusing really on China. And so he's trying to deal with these contradictions. Can they succeed in all of this? I think that I think we're headed towards disaster. Limited nuclear weapons have been integrated and counterforce and into U.S. strategy, directly into U.S. Defense strategy now. I mean, into its primary strategic posture. And this is, and they're talking about 2027. It's really dangerous. Trump has actually laughed with Musk about use of nuclear weapons, saying it's not really all that bad, right? And it's very serious because the United States is desperate, and we all knew this was coming at some point. The United States is desperate in terms of losing its hegemonic power, and that it's going to have recourse to desperate actions. So I don't tend to look at, well, will they succeed or not? I tend to look at the prospects of world war, and what comes out of that, nobody really knows. But nobody was going to really win in a world war that involves nuclear weapons today. So yeah, there will be no success, and economically, they can't beat China anymore. And you can't beat China by destroying the entire infrastructure of the United States, and the whole, firing all the scientists and destroying the education system. And talk about short-sighted strategies. It's desperate, and it's irrational and lacks any kind of coordination. So I mean, that's the situation, but it's a frightening one.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to go in sequence. We have too many hands raised, so I'm going to go to people who have never spoken in our forum, and I hope I don't make a mistake. So I have three hands like that I recognize. Mike H., please only ask a question because we want to preserve our time. Mike H.
Yeah. So my question is about the growth of the military industrial complexes in multiple countries. It seems like with the increased spending, NATO targeted 5%, that many European countries are developing new weapons or producing licensed weapons. And it seems like China is a large producer. And I'm not sure if their weapons are indigenous or if somehow the rumor's true that somehow they tapped into the designs of other countries and maybe modified their weapons. And so this is my question is, with all the increased military spending, does that translate always into new ships and new ballistic missiles that may or may not have nuclear warheads? And how this will play out if we have countries like South Korea and Poland and India and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and all these countries that think that the best thing they can do with their surplus currency is to build more military factories.
That's a big question in itself. I mean, the question is, Europe is increasing its military spending. What is it increasing it for? It's mainly, I guess, directed at this point at what they would think they need in a Ukraine war, and maybe confronting Russia. The danger, of course, is NATO is a nuclear treaty. Basically, the United States has provided the nuclear umbrella, as they say, but there are also two other countries who have nuclear weapons in NATO: Britain and France. And just as the United States is doing nuclear sharing, has been doing nuclear sharing, They say it isn't proliferation because the United States still controls the weapons. Britain and France are talking about doing nuclear sharing in Europe, so they would have their own nuclear weapons in other European countries. And this pretty, this kind of thing, and with counterforce strategies, can easily get out of control. It isn't maybe the amount of military spending, but it's the quality of it. The problem that the United States faces with Chinese military spending is that the qualitative advances in China are so great that and even though the United States spends as much militarily on the next as the next 7 countries, the China is in some ways advancing beyond U.S. technology. So, for example, the supersonic missiles, I mean, Russia has them too. The United States didn't have them. One reason the U.S. didn't have them was because they're MAD weapons, not counterforce weapons. But still, the advance that China is making in technology in the military realm as well has the United States frightened. And, I think we should all be frightened, right? It's like, and you can't take sides in a nuclear war, right? There can only be wrong in a nuclear war. There can't be right and wrong. And more countries having more advanced missiles, more countries having nuclear weapons on their soil, if not, this is all, this could all blow up. I mean, if you looked at the events before the First World War or the events before the Second World War, and then compare it to the events today, you can think, well, yeah, this is alarming because all of these things that are happening could in a few years from now be seen as the signs that led to the World War. And I mean, they're real in that sense. The things that are happening are real in that sense. I mean, when is Germany going to come out with nuclear weapons? I mean, they could probably do it overnight practically.
Okay, thank you. D. Miles would be next.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Foster. I'd like to ask a couple of questions. One, if you could speak to the movement for peace in this country, not just the peace movement, but a new regenerated movement for peace in this country. What would you say are the decisive steps which could be taken to move toward staying the hand of what you indicate as being on our front door or at our front door?
Yeah, can you
also,
first one question only, and if time permits, come back with your second. Thank you. So John, go.
Well, one thing is that I wrote an article in the new Denial of Imperialism on the Left about a year ago, and there has been among left intellectuals and Western Marxist intellectuals a tendency to deny imperialism in various ways, which is itself a product of the new Cold War, the split of the left on these issues, and attempts to deny that there is a north-south division in the world or center-periphery division in the world, essentially, and the arguments that China is imperialist in the way that the United States is imperialist. These things are really big threats to any kind of U.S. and global anti-imperialist movement. I tend to take, in terms of the on the ground movement, I tend to be very influenced by groups like the Black Alliance for Peace. I think that in the United States, the core of the anti-imperialist and movement and really anti-racist movement globally has come out of the Black community, and I expect increasingly out of the Latinx community, and you also could look at the Native American community, but it isn't I think especially I read Black Agenda reports, which is very informative. I follow the Black Alliance for Peace. I think that the organizations on the ground that have that are Black, that focus on Pan-Africanism, the struggles that between the struggles over U.S. Imperialism that are interconnected with our own populations. What about Puerto Rico? What about and that with our own history we have to work that out, so that I think that there's a tendency among many intellectuals on the left to fail to link up with the Black movement, that going back to Malcolm X and way before that, or even Martin Luther King, the Black movement has actually resonated most strongly in this area. And so I think that that's one of the things that makes the U.S. struggle against imperialism on the left in the United States different than, say, in other advanced capitalist countries, particularly because the leadership assumed by our own, minority groups, if you want to use that term, and here Trump wants to make he wants to make the United States into an ethnically pure white country, and it's not very well disguised now. So we have to link these things up and understand. We have to understand what the struggle over immigration is really about, in terms of imperialism, in terms of race.
Okay, thank you. Steve, please ask only one question and keep it brief.
All right, thank you. I sent you a private chat asking for a list of the intellectuals that you mentioned and the papers, and I hope that you can make that available to people. So I think if we study these papers, we can get something out of it. And my question is, why do you think the ethno focus of Trump is not talked about? I've been kind of really shocked that most leftists don't see this, and I'm black as black can be. I mean, he attacks DEI, which is attacking civil rights. That's what that is. People aren't picking up on it. I don't see people even opposing it. Then he sends, now the arms troops in the Marines and the National Guard and ICE, people are opposing. But I don't understand why this is being missed. I don't get it. Maybe you can help me understand why people aren't seeing this. It's clear as his cabinet's all white. It's all white men and women. I mean, come on.
Thank you, Steve.
That's it, buddy. Thank you.
I agree with you fully. And I think one of the problems is that the left, say, you could look at the arguments of Vivek Chibber and who edits Catalyst, which is close to Jacobin and the basic approach of Jacobin. I could give you a lot of other examples, but they've tried to say that we need a class project in which we subsume race, in which, so we're going to talk only about class. We're not going to talk about race. They're almost afraid of the issue of race. I think the race issue destroys the left, so they're going to just talk in terms of class. I think that's wrong. I think It's strategically wrong, morally and politically wrong. I think it's not a Marxist approach. And and it usually means rejecting any real critique of imperialism as well. So I think we have a problem there. In Monthly Review, we think of it as a problem of race and class, not necessarily putting one before the other, but Marx argued that, he did argue that the race problem was prior to the class problem, that we had to address that in many ways first. And so, I mean, I could give you the quotations, but that's the viewpoint. And I think that that's right. We have a race and class problem. We can't erase class. We can't have a race-blind class politics or anything like that. So the part of the left, which sort of wants to join up with liberalism, which adopts that kind of strategy, I think is in a way shooting itself in the foot or destroying any possibility of action. But it's also politically, morally, and strategically wrong. It's wrong in its entirety. It would separate us from the global issue. So the more we recognize the race problem in relation to capitalism and imperialism, the better our analysis is. The more that we recognize that, this neo-fascism uses race for its purposes, and this is critical to its whole approach. Not that that explains its whole approach, but it's absolutely critical. So I agree with you completely, and I think we in times when when things turn to the right, and things get more dangerous, some parts of the left are going to back off and try to find a way to accommodate. Other parts of the left are going to take a more revolutionary perspective, which is the kind of perspective that I'm talking about. And there's no excuse in the United States for downplaying the role of race in U.S. history and society. We just can't do that.
Thank you, John. I have 3 other hands raised and our time is up. John, do you have a few minutes extra that you can stay on, or do you have to go?
No, I'd be glad to.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is, in order not to bear too much on his time, John's time, I'm going to ask the 3 people, simply ask a question, and then John will answer. Eugene, with that said, Eugene Rule is next.
Okay, well, great talk. I really appreciate everything you had to say, John. And I think this is an important topic, and it's great to have you here. But I just want to say, I just want to comment. I know there's been an election for mayor, or a primary election in your city, New York City, with the fellow Zohan Mamdani. And personally, I find this very inspiring because Trump is so depressing. Everything that I support and care for is under attack. And it's good to see a shining light, so to speak, here. And I know that happened in your city, in New York City. So I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Actually, I don't live in New York. I live in Eugene, Oregon, on the other side of the continent. But yeah, there have been reports that Mamdani's election has changed the whole set of rules, though, on politics and Jewish, and being Jewish in the United States. 20% of the Jewish population in New York supported him, and of course, he got very large votes from youth, from the Islamic population, from the South Asian population. but New York City has a bigger Jewish population, I think, than any city in the world. And the fact that Mamdani was elected there does suggest that things are changing quite massively as a result of the genocide in Palestine. And people don't, and he was quite open about referring to it as a genocide. And so, and which is being classified as anti-Semitism, or they trying to classify that as anti-Semitism. But obviously the population in New York didn't buy that. And that is extremely important. It means probably a shift in the whole US, and frightening to the political establishment. But it also, there's a youth effect that's happening. There are new things that are happening. And so my students always ask me, well, if they tend to think that things will always be the same, because it's always projected in the United States that things will always be the same. And I say, no, things are changing now. They may change in ways you don't like, but they're changing very rapidly now, and we have to be part of that change and determine it in our own way. And if you a year or two ago, the idea that somebody who said that that Israel was committing genocide in Palestine could be elected in New York, nobody would have believed it. And so it just indicates that there's hope and there is change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon Rose is next.
Thank you. My question is, what part of the ruling class does MAGA represent? And where in the ruling class is the opposition to that? I think clearly not everybody in the ruling class wants MAGA to succeed, or believes that that's the best way forward for US imperialism to stabilize itself and continue on. Do you have any comment on this possible splits in the ruling class?
Well, I should say that somebody just asked me where do you find, give a list of the people I've been referring to and the sources, but the sources are all in that article, and Trump in the White House, and in the other articles I wrote. But I think almost everything I referred to is in that article, so you can find the sources and find sources on your question as well. But I think Trump's support, of course, it's he has a whole sector of the technology, of the big technology, which is very top of the monopoly finance capital now, particularly the part coming out of Silicon Valley with Thiel and all of those, Musk and so on. There's a whole part of a big part of the technology that is supporting him, but it's the part that is also tied to private equity. So the corporations like, some of the big corporations like Microsoft and so on, and Apple, who are more tied into, they're public corporations, as we say, in the stock market and so on. They're not so much supporters of him. They enter in at the last moment, but they're his support comes from technology tied to private equity, tied to big oil, and sectors of finance, right? So it's a little bit different. It isn't, strangely, he doesn't have the support of the the older blocks of capital as much. So there, MAGA does, in terms of the monopoly finance capital, there is a sector that's supporting him that's very powerful, that in many ways is on top. A whole lot of billionaires we can list, and some of them I list, and cento billionaires, and but the others, he has these giant tax cuts coming, right? So all of Wall Street, all the corporations, they're all waiting for these giant tax cuts, right? And so to that extent, they support him, right? They support his deregulation, his privatization, his tax cuts, and so on, that benefit them. And so they're on his side to some extent, because they're waiting for it. They're drooling out the mouths over that. But the problem really arises, and it rose with Musk, that U.S. multinational monopoly finance capital is also international, it's global. It depends on global production. And it's uncertain about his tariffs for a whole lot of reasons. But, cars are not made in the United States, but they're not made in any country specifically. Like the parts are made in 100 different countries, or I'm not saying, well, maybe 50 different countries. But the thing is that we have global production, and his whole tariff strategy is making them nervous, because how are you in this situation? How are you going to do anything? And the idea of reindustrializing in the United States in this context is hopeless, and U.S. So all of that is it's there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think that his biggest support is oil, private equity, and certain areas of technology, big tech that are especially given the access to the Pentagon budget, right? Palantir, Thiel's, Palantir, or he co-founded it. It's like the big winner right now in the Pentagon, and of course the Pentagon is very dependent on Musk's SpaceX and so on. So those technology groups are very, very tied to some of Trump's strategy. I mean, the Palantir and SpaceX are going to be big winners in Trump's Golden Dome, right? Golden Dome, which is supposed to protect the United States from nuclear weapons, so we can attack anybody and they can't attack back, which is a fantasy, but in terms of the money and the technology and the relation to those corporations, that's a big deal. So he's got those sectors.
Okay, thank you. Citizen of the planet, please ask your question. Let's finish it because we have extended time considerably. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to be real brief. First of all, Trump and Iran's tacitly agreed upon Kabuki theater bombing of each other's assets, I assert, was so that Trump didn't have to go to war against Iran. And people may forget that Trump ended up lowering the tariffs on China lower than on Europe. And Trump said, people may forget, that the EU was the US's real economic enemy, not China. My question was, in August of 2022, Michael Clare of the Quincy Institute said that by December of 2022, the US would be at war with China. And I called in to the KPFA program that he said that on and analytically pointed out why that was certainly not going to be the case. And obviously I was right. So my question to you, which I did put in the chat, but since I have a chance to ask you, how is the US supposed to defeat a vast, technologically advanced, economically first world, international thermoballistic missile superpower of 1.4 billion people? Thank you.
Well, in terms of the China, that the U.S. and China have been having it out, and China has had weapons that the U.S. didn't expect in terms of tariffs, or that Trump and his advisors didn't expect. The fact that they could cut off the rare earths and basically deprive all U.S. technology, the fact that they have a monopoly there. China hit the U.S. really hard economically, and the U.S. has had to back down. In terms of the tariffs on Europe, the goal there is to get Europe to appreciate their currencies relative to the dollar, and then the United States is using, under Trump, is using tariffs as a weapon that make no economic sense, but are being used as a political device, war by other means. So in terms of defeating China, yeah, I mean, I don't think the United States can defeat China, economically and militarily, but there's this. First of all, the 2027 date is used in every speech coming out of practically all over the place, coming out of the Trump administration. And it started in the first Trump administration. Over and over again, they're saying China is going to move against Taiwan by 2027, which means that they're seeing 2027, and it's in all of the defense documents, as the year of military confrontation with China. Now, this isn't coming from somebody like Michael Clare. It's coming from the Trump administration itself, from the Pentagon, and so on. And so you have to take it seriously. At least they're trying to scare people into preparing for a 2027 confrontation. And given the plans of Elbridge Colby, and which are clearly articulated, and he's the main person determining defense strategic policy, you have to take it seriously. It's not a prediction. It's their statement in terms of, we have to be prepared for war then. Now, in terms of war with China, they're not talking about like annihilating all of China, or China annihilating all of the U.S. They don't, they don't want to go there. They're not talking about mutual assured destruction. That's long gone. They're talking about limited nuclear war, counterforce weapons, escalation ladders, kind of calibrated attacks, destroying whole sectors of infrastructure, maybe going after command centers, and basically doing it in a way they can effect regime change. They've been theorizing that, but see how they can't even carry out regime change with respect to Iran. There's no way they can do it with respect to China. But the thing is, it isn't whether they can succeed. It's whether the question is if they think they can succeed, or whether they're going to try, or whether they're going to do this. I ended this with Squeezy's piece about a ship directed by a madman, right? Or madmen. We have to consider that possibility, right? That we're going to be led into a disastrous situation because a large part of the U.S. leadership is so desperate that they're doing things, contemplating doing things that are more dangerous than before. And most of the left still thinks, that the U.S. policy is mutual assured destruction. It's nuclear policy, something that was banned in something like 35 or 40 years ago. And it's all about counterforce. It's all about limited nuclear war. Or, first strike is another form of what they think would be a limited nuclear war. So it's all about that. And they're, if you put in charge in the Pentagon the person who is the author of the strategy of denial, the main theorist of limited nuclear war, is made the main policymaker in the Pentagon, you have to take that seriously, right? We can't shut our eyes to that. And so I'm not predicting anything. I'm just telling you what is.
Thank you, John,
these-
and
have these
thank you very
doctors-
much. Sorry.
Can I just say
sorry,
real
sorry,
fast? Can I
sorry,
just
we
say
have to
real
stop.
fast? Have these
Sorry.
Dr. Strangeloves picked out what cities, American cities, they want to lose? You know,
Sorry, I have to end the program
It's
now.
more complicated than that.
Sorry, I have to end the program at this point. We've extended. John, thank you very much. And we'll look forward to your second visit and hope all goes well with your health. And thank you once again. I'm
Yeah,
going to
thank
stop
you.
the recording.
Thanks, John.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
everyone.
inviting.